Good morning everyone. It's 10:30, there's maybe a couple more people to come in, but I think we'll get started. So good morning and welcome to this, the second open meeting of Perth U3A. Great to see such a good turnout, and welcome particularly to any guests who are here. This is an open meeting, so you don't have to be a member of Perth U3A to join. So welcome to everyone. We've made a very good start to the session. In particular, I'm pleased to report that we've reached the membership target that was set to partly for budgeting purposes, but to make sure that the organisation remains viable and in good heart. That is much earlier than it happened last year. So it looks as if Perth U3A is on the up and in good form. So before we hand over to our speaker, I'll invite Yvonne, our secretary, to give the notices.
Morning, everybody. So I've got a few things to let you know, and they'll come through again to everybody when I email them whenever, in the next day or so. So we've got a couple of groups that are looking to attract some additional members. There's Book Group 3 that's led by Barbara Smith, and Scrabble 2, which is a new group. We've had Scrabble 1 for some time, but now we also have Scrabble 2. And the leader of that is Christina MacDonald, and she'd love to hear from you, because I think at the moment it's just her in the group, so she'd really like to hear from you. Now, moving on to Unit 7 and Unit 6. For those of you who are a bit new to us, these are our shared spaces where we have a lot of our group meetings. And the building management has been in touch with us recently to say that they're going to be replacing the flooring everywhere, right? And also doing some painting of windows. So please be a bit careful as you're coming into the building to make sure you don't trip over anything or get paint on your clothes and whatnot. Regards Unit 6, that's a room that's next door to Unit 7, and we have just started using it as an overflow from Unit 7 because we're now at capacity in Unit 7. So one group is meeting there once every 4 weeks. I need to emphasise that Unit 6 isn't an optional extra, because whereas we rent Unit 7 on an annual basis, Unit 6 we rent on a weekly basis. So you can't just move into Unit 6 because you'd like to, basically. You need to ask us, and then we'll consider whether it's affordable or not. Okay? What have I got over the page? Yes. This is about online safety. You're probably aware of this, that there's been quite a lot of high-profile data breaches by big organisations and governments, and there's been other instances of criminal online activity. So we want to do our bit to make sure that we, the U3A, are keeping as safe as we can. So when I send out this by email, you'll find a couple of links on it to useful tips as to how to keep yourselves safe when you're online. Because one of the things about online safety is it's a collaborative effort. Even for organisations, to a certain extent, you rely on individuals to be careful themselves in order to strengthen the safety of the entire organisation. So that's why I'm mentioning that. Dundee University, as you may remember, runs a simulated patient scheme at Ninewells, and a member joined up a couple of years ago and said it's enjoyable and rewarding, and they're still looking for new people to do this. It's where you go along and you pretend to be a patient, I don't know, with a heart attack or something, and medical students practice doing the right things in response to what's the matter with you. Which to me does sound like an awful lot of fun. So again, there'll be contact. Well, you know, I'm a bit of a, I don't know, a diva sometimes. Anyway, so there'll be contact details if you're interested in pursuing that further. And then last, but by no means least, is the Christmas lunch. John Babb will be in touch with you fairly soon now to give you details as to how to sign up and how to pay. But just to let you know that, as I've said before, it's on the 11th of December. Our group, the Semitones, will be coming along to give us a bit of entertainment. The cost will be for up to 3 courses, £32. And you'll be able to pay for that at these meetings with card, or there'll be a cheque alternative as well, which will be detailed in the email that John sends out. And you'll be glad to know that's all I've got to say. So I'll hand back to Richard.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Yvonne. Right, now it's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Bruce Keith, who is our speaker for this morning. Bruce is a retired chartered surveyor, an environmentalist who started his professional career working on estates in Perthshire and Aberdeenshire, and in Edinburgh with the Department of Agriculture. He moved south of the border to Peterborough in 1996 to become Chief Surveyor to English Nature, but kept his Scottish connections and kept his links to Scotland, retiring 10 years ago as Head of Property at Scottish and Southern Electricity. Since retirement, Bruce has researched and written 3 books, combining his passion for Scottish history, geography and landscape with his interest in heritage conservation. So this morning, Bruce is going to take us on a journey with his 3rd book, Scotland Beneath the Surface, a Subterranean Odyssey, exploring the natural and man-made heritage under our feet. So, welcome.
Richard, thank you very much indeed. It's a great pleasure to be back in Perth. Now, can everybody hear me okay? Yes. Can, that's great. Let's say, this Scotland Beneath the Surface, this was actually my COVID pandemic project. I needed something to do to occupy the little grey cells during all those weeks and months of lockdown. And there are, after all, only so many times you can paint the shed, are there not? I've always been fascinated by the natural and the man-made heritage that lies under our feet, so Scotland Beneath the Surface was born. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome this morning to my subterranean odyssey. And some bits are odder than others, I have to say. The thing about Beneath the Surface, it means different things to different people. Some of you will think about natural caves. Others will think about hollow mountains in which to generate hydroelectric power. Some of you might think about railway tunnels, or perhaps secret bunkers. Others, if you're up in Kildonan in Rossshire, if you're in Tyndrum in Perthshire, or across in Auchtermuchty in 1854, you might even think about gold mining. Don't all rush off to Auchtermuchty, by the way, it's all gone, all gone. But you know, I learned a couple of new words when I was doing this research. Now, you're a much more erudite audience than me. I'm sure you'll know them anyway, but just to boast, I'll share the couple with you. The first is speleology. Do you know what a speleologist does? Here's a clue. He likes to go underground into caves and potholes. I was ever so lucky. Early on in the research, I met Alan Jeffreys. Alan's an Edinburgh man. He's in his mid-80s now. And in 1961, he founded the Grampian Speleological Group. He's been in every cave and pothole in Scotland and far further afield. He did 2 very kind things for me. Firstly, he wrote the foreword for my book there. Secondly, even more kindly, he actually gave me some beautiful photographs of inside Scottish caves to put in the book, just like this one here. That was lucky for me, because I suffer from claustrophobia. There was no way you were getting me in a cave with or without a camera, I have to say. Now, let me take you up to Applecross in Wester Ross. This cave goes by a quite, for me anyway, quite unpronounceable Gaelic name. But when you see the stalagmites and the stalactites there, is it any wonder, ladies and gentlemen, that they call that the Cave of Wonders? And further up in Assynt in Sutherland, they have the Cave of Bones, in which they found the skeletal remains of bears and wolves, all sorts of wildlife that roamed this country of ours long before any of us were ever thought of. I kind of knew that before I did the research. What I hadn't realised is that Scotland boasts the 4th largest sea cave in the world. It's up at Hall of Bordie in Shetland. Check it out the next time you're up in Shetland. But of course, our ancestors started life living in caves. But it wasn't just Fred and Wilma Flintstone who lived in a cave, you know. Much more recently than that, here we have, much more recently than that, there were 3 families, 34 people, all living in a cave up in Wick in Caithness. Here they are here. They lived there for about 3 generations, around about 1900. They were called tinkers. They weren't tinkies as we would know them nowadays. They were actually involved in the tin trade in Caithness. Now, Dr. Arthur Mitchell is an Elgin-born GP, but he practiced in Edinburgh. He made a special study of the tinker folk up in Wick. He studied them over 2 or 3 years. He was particularly interested in the psyche of people who lived in caves. Now, if I tell you that Dr. Arthur Mitchell was also appointed the Commissioner for Lunacy in Scotland, I'll let you draw your own conclusions on any correlation between the two. But you know, it became illegal to live in a cave. They don't want you living in a cave during the war in case you decide to have a barbecue at night and you attracted overhead aircraft. So imagine my surprise when I looked at the census data from Scotland from 1931, 41, 51 and 61 to find out that no fewer than 55 of our fellow countrymen actually declared a natural cave as their main or sole residence. And I can only think it was a tax dodge to get out of paying poll tax or council tax or rates or whatever it was at the end of the day. And that got me thinking, you know, I wonder if any of our contemporaries used a natural cave as a place to self-isolate or socially distance during the COVID pandemic. Perhaps the historians of the future will make something of that. But this guy doesn't look too healthy, does he? This is Rosemarkie Man. He found in a cave just up on the Black Isle, north of Inverness, just a few years ago. And he's reckoned to be 1,700 years old. Now, Professor Sue Black and her team of forensic anthropologists from Dundee University have analysed this chap's bones. And they've concluded that actually he had a relatively healthy diet, from which they deduce he must have been a member of the nobility. Now, I'm not a forensic anthropologist, but I can tell you, just by looking at the skull there, that he had at least one enemy. Somebody's given him a big dunt in the head with an axe and stuck him away in this cave 1,700 years ago. But the great thing that Sue Black and her team at Dundee have done, and they're world leaders in the appliance of science and technology in forensic anthropology, is that they've managed to facially reconstruct Rosemarkie Man. So we can see what one of our ancestors from 1,700 years ago actually looked like. There he is there. He's a kind of cross between William Wallace and Billy Connolly. Don't you agree? But let me take you much further back. This is 5,000 years ago. Have you all been up to Orkney? It's my favourite place outside Perth, I have to tell you. I was there just last week, actually. This is Skara Brae, of course. 5,000 years, 3,000 BC. Our ancestors were building structures like this. Quite sophisticated construction and a natty taste in stone furniture too. Eat your heart out IKEA, I say. But you know, this is 500 years before the Egyptians were building the pyramids in Egypt, and it's 500 years before some Englishmen decided it would be a jolly good idea to put a few stones in a field in Wiltshire and dance around about them at Stonehenge. Our ancestors were building structures like this. Of course, it was only discovered in 1850. If you go up there, you know the guy who lived in the house next door, William Watt, woke up one morning, there'd been a sand storm, and the wind had blown away the sand to reveal this hidden settlement. It took another 50 years for them to dig out what you see today, which is one of Scotland's 7 World Heritage Sites. So we should be very proud of each and every one of them. Do you know, I got to thinking, if he woke up that morning and there'd been a storm which blew the sand away to reveal the settlement, surely it must have blown there in the first place to conceal it. So I looked back over the meteorological data over the centuries in Scotland, and I find there have been a few significant storms. The Muckle Spate of 1829, for example, swept away Thomas Telfer's beautiful bridge up at Fochabers across the Spey. And then, of course, 1694, the Great Sand Drift of 1694, which 17 farms up at Culbin, just outside Elgin, completely covered in sand in a single night. And if you go up to the Forvey, the National Nature Reserve just on the Ifan Estuary, that was a settlement too. And you know, there's a parish called Brew on Shetland, and on a single night, that whole parish was covered in 6 inches of sand. Somebody has described Shetland as looking like the Sahara. I bet that's the first time you've ever heard Shetland described as looking like the Sahara. But you know, in these days, of course, any mishap that befell you, it was put down to witchcraft. And my goodness, did they no pay the price. Nowadays, looking more objectively at it, scientists reckon that probably what happened is there was a change in the ocean currents. The Gulf Stream, which influences so much of our temperature around the British Isles, temporarily stopped, maybe for 12, 18 months. And it gave rise to these enormous sandstorms covering our heritage. Now, when I was a little boy, we used to go to St Andrews for our holidays. I'm sure you've seen, but no, St Andrews Castle, the Bottle Dungeon, hewn out of solid rock, in which Cardinal Beaton ended his days. I knew as a schoolboy that St Andrews Castle had not one but 3 siege mines or tunnels. What I hadn't realised until I started researching it is St Andrews Castle boasts the largest complex of siege mines of any fortification anywhere in Western Europe. And we've got it just down the road there. And just further south in East Lothian, if you go to Gifford, there's a castle in Gifford called Yester Castle. Yester Castle is today but a rickless stones. But beneath Yester Castle lies this. This is the undercroft of Yester Castle, called the Goblin Hall. And it was built in 1296. 1296. Now, that's a drawing of it in 1896, when it was already 600 years old. You can still get a key and go and have a look at it today. But just to put that in context, 1296 was the same year as William Wallace was given Edward I a bloody nose down at the Battle of Stirling Bridge. Our ancestors were building that completely underground. Amazing. But of course, when you're building things on top of other things, isn't new. When Robert Adam built the Royal Exchange in Edinburgh, all he did was plonk it on top of the tenements that were there already. These poor folk all got shifted out in due time, and it became the City Archive. It was an air raid shelter during the Second World War. Now, of course, you'll remember, if you've been on Edinburgh's tourist route, it's part of that complex of passageways known as Mary King's Close. Have you all done the Edinburgh tourist trail? Well, that's a must for you. Most people probably know that. I just wonder how many people know about the South Bridge in Edinburgh. This is a cross-section of it. And beneath the South Bridge, there are 120 vaults. I'm going to say that again, just in case you think I said 120 volts. But what I'm about to tell you is every bit as shocking. Because in each of these vaults, and only one of them is visible from street level, live between 25 and 30 people. Multiply that up, it's over 2,500 people living under the South Bridge in Edinburgh. You can imagine what unhygienic conditions prevailed. Now, I have to say, they were all immigrants. They'd come across from Ireland to escape the horrors of the potato famine, and Edinburgh saw fit to house them beneath the South Bridge. Robert Louis Stevenson, who was writing his diary at the time, said it was a terrible indictment of Edinburgh hospitality. And I'm inclined to agree with them. You know, the materials, the rocks that built that bridge, the very rocks that built our built heritage in this country are hewn from rocks from beneath our surface. Now, anybody from Aberdeen? Well, you'll know where this is. Yvonne. Rubislaw Quarry. It's 380 feet deep, it's 360 feet in diameter, all filled with water now, but they reckon it was the largest man-made hole in Western Europe. And it was granite from Rubislaw, which of course built the piers on the Forth Bridge, the railway bridge, in the 1880s. The terraces of the Houses of Parliament down in London are paved with Rubislaw granite, and of course, as you'll know, Yvonne, it built most of Union Street in Aberdeen to boot. Now, it was granite from another quarry, just outside Aberdeen. Kemnay, do you know the village of Kemnay? They produced the silver granite for Marshall College. That's a projected shot that makes it look very, very grand. It's a beautiful, beautiful building. Actually, is it any wonder when you look at that they call that sugar translated into stone? And do you know, ladies and gentlemen, they claim it's the second largest granite building in the world. And that begs this morning's first quiz question. Can anybody tell me where the largest granite building in the world is? Madrid, absolutely. You know, you're the only person. I had to come to Perth to find somebody that knew the answer to that. Ellis Scholar, well done. But I think Marshall College gives it a pretty good run for its money. Horror of horrors, you know. They tell me that if Adolf Hitler had won the Second World War, he wanted to make Marshall College's headquarters. He told the Luftwaffe when they were bombing Aberdeen, whatever you do, don't hit Marshall College. Well, of course, it survives to this day, and nowadays houses an altogether more friendly bunch of people. Aberdeen City Council, they're all in there. But you know, by the 1850s, Scotland was exporting about 50,000 tonnes of granite a year. If you go to Christchurch in New Zealand, Adelaide in Australia, Montreal or Vancouver in Canada, and I'm lucky enough to be into each of these cities, I've seen statues of Robert Burns made out of Aberdeenshire granite. Hey, but that's the 1850s. Let me take you to the 21st century. This is across an estate I used to work on Morven, on the Sound of Mull, called Artornish Estate. This is the Glensanda Super Quarry. This drill bit is at the top of the mountain, and it goes right down through the mountain, 1,600 feet. And with every explosive blast, it releases 70,000 tonnes of granite. We were exporting 50,000 tonnes in the 1850s, 70,000 tonnes on a single blast. And it then goes on a conveyor belt through a tunnel for a distance of 1 mile to the jetty at the loch side. Because, of course, the only way you can get the granite out is by boat. It's a magnificent modern civil engineering. Now, hey, you've got your walls for your built heritage. You're going to put a roof on it, aren't you? What are you going to put on the roof? Ballachulish slate, absolutely. Ballachulish slate. Now, Ballachulish Quarry, founded in 1693, that's the same year as the massacre of Glencoe, and as you know, it's only about 1.5 miles down the road from Glencoe, produced 16 million slates a year. It employed 300 people. Everybody has heard of Ballachulish slate. They're almost synonymous. Imagine my surprise then, ladies and gentlemen, when I was doing the research, I discovered that actually Ballachulish Quarry last produced a slate in March 1955. It'll come as a surprise to you this morning when I tell you that I was born in April 1955. So although, you know, everybody's heard of Ballachulish slate, it actually hasn't produced a slate in my entire life. But this place has. This is Easdale. Now you go down from Oban, turn right across the Clachan Bridge, across the Atlantic, you know, down to Seal, here's Easdale. This was producing slate until about 1990 or so. Of course, it's got a change of land use. What's a slate? Very, very flat stone. What do you do that? You skim it. And Easdale has hosted the World Stone Skimming Championship for several years in the past. They get fantastic publicity. Well, they did until last week when somebody was caught cheating in the World Stone Skimming Championships. Did you see it in the paper? Absolutely amazing. Now, my wife, she was looking at the criteria for entry to the World Stone Skimming Championship. She says, you know, Bruce, now that you're 70 years old, you qualify for entry to the old tossers category. This is Ling, this is further up the Firth. They were quarrying here until about 1962. Now, believe it or not, Historic Environment Scotland, when they're doing these fantastic building conservation projects, have been importing slate from Spain, or even worse, from Brazil. That's hardly sustainable development, is it? So, the great news story here is that Historic Environment Scotland are talking to the Ling Community Development Trust. They're going to restart the slate quarrying industry on Ling. And there are 3 wins in all of that. Firstly, henceforth, you're going to get home-produced slate on your building conservation projects. Secondly, when you produce slate, you produce an enormous amount of debris material. You can see it lying around there beside the workman. Well, they're going to quite literally use that to shore up the shore of Lyng against sea level rise. But the biggest win, ladies and gentlemen, is that for the first time in 45 years, young people on Lyng and the surrounding area are going to get job opportunities in slate quarrying. Absolutely fantastic. The whole area suffers from enormous rural depopulation. Great opportunity. It's a win-win-win for the slate quarrying industry here in Scotland. There's an enormous amount of water under our feet in Scotland. I know in Perth, until you got the flood defences, you thought there was a lot of water on the surface here too, on occasion. Did you know there's more water under our feet in Scotland than in all the 34,273 lochs? And that includes Loch Ness. And Loch Ness has more water in it than all the lakes and rivers in England and Wales combined. It's a huge national natural resource. According to SEPA, and we're not complacent about this in any way, most of it's in pretty good biological, biochemical, ecological condition. Long may that continue, because it's a hugely important natural resource. Did you know that 70% of the water that's used in the whisky distilling industry here in Scotland is sourced from water from beneath our feet? And I think that's an appropriate juncture at this talk for me to stop and raise a glass to Uska. Now, these are water pipes, hollow elm pipes found in Edinburgh just a few years ago. Now, if I was to give you an address in Edinburgh, 555 Castle Hill in Edinburgh, would you know what's there? I'll give you a clue. It's right at the top of the Royal Mile, next to the Castle Esplanade. 555 Castle Hill. Do you think it's the Edinburgh Woolen Mill? Or the Heather and Haggis Tartan Shoppy? Well, it's not. 555 Castle Hill is actually the only reservoir in the United Kingdom that has got its own postal address. And there's been a reservoir since about 1800, but I tell a lie. Actually, there was an earlier one. They used to pump water up from the Nor Loch, you know, Princess Street Gardens. Somebody's gone and built a railway station down there too, I see. And they used to put it in pipes like this, right from the top of the hill, right down the whole of the Royal Mile, down past John Knox's house, down past the Netherbow, down to Holyrood. And it used to feed wells all the way down. And the little boys used to go out with buckets from the big houses and fill them with water and take them back into their lords and masters. My goodness. Do you know what these little lads were called? You saw them last night in the Ryder Cup. My goodness, they were called caddies. And that's the origins of the golfing term. They were water carriers. But you know, what happens to all that water away down in the borders, Tala and all these, comes up to give Edinburgh its water supply? Well, it all comes up to its Alnwick Hill. This is the storage unit beneath Alnwick Hill, 18,000 gallons. It's right at the back of King's Buildings there in Edinburgh. It's empty there. But you know, when it's full, they actually have built houses on top of the Alnwick Hill reservoir. I just wondered when the estate agents were selling the houses, did they advertise them as sitting on top of the largest waterbed in Scotland? Who knows? I couldn't be here without talking about the Loch Katrine water supply scheme. Isn't that fantastic? Do you know, the Loch Katrine scheme feeding Glasgow has 25 aqueducts, but they're not all bridges and pipes. Some of them are hewn through solid rock, deep, deep trenches. This is actually up Craigmaddy, if you know Milngavie. That's during construction there. And you can see how deep it is. Look at the operators. And they're all wearing hats. But they're not safety helmets, they're straw boaters. Very, very appropriate when you're digging a tunnel, I can tell you. There's a wee story about this photograph, though. A few years ago, just 5 or 6 years ago, Scottish Water were moving office from Postle Park in Glasgow to another part of the city. And the boss said, I'll tell you what we should do. We should use the opportunity of this flit to have a paper clearance day. We'll throw out all that rubbish in the back office that nobody ever looks at anyway. I've got a skip outside, come and give me a hand to load it. So all morning they loaded it up. Just at lunchtime, this young water technician had one of these ring-bind folders. He threw it on top of the skip and it opened up and it revealed not only this photograph, but 100 other photographs just like it of the Loch Katrine water supply under construction in the second half of the 19th century. He said, boss, we can't possibly throw these up. Well, of course not. They're all in the National Archive now. But if, like me, you like to have an occasional declutter at home, Just be very careful before you throw it in the bin, because it could be part of our national legacy. You never know. It certainly was here. Now, of course, I've talked a lot about water for drinking. You might need a comfort break now. But I tell you, down in Edinburgh, they are so crude. Even to this day, all they do is open the window, shout Gardyloo, and out onto the street it goes. Terrible. I have to tell you, and it breaks my heart as an East Coaster to tell you this, that they're much, much more refined in the West. They are. Now let me take you to Paisley. Now, I know you don't often hear the words Paisley and refined in the same sentence. The year's 1824, and John Crawford was locking about his back garden in Paisley one Sunday afternoon, and he fell down a hole. And he called in the local authority. They said, "That's a hole, you know. We'll need to look into it." And they did. And this is what they found. It's the 12th century foul water pipe, sewage pipe from Paisley Abbey. 12th century. Look at that Gothic arch. Lovely architecture, marvellous engineering. Reminds you of the Goblin Hall beneath Yester Castle in East Lothian, does it not? About the same time. Absolutely fantastic. Now, the local history societies down in Renfrewshire have all worked together to excavate about 200 metres of this tunnel, and they found all sorts of interesting things, including a thing called a polyphonic slate. Now, polyphonic slate's not a slate that you stick on your roof. It's actually a slate on which music is written. And they reckon it actually is the oldest recording of music ever found anywhere in Scotland. And that's the second new word I learned after speleology. Polyphonic. Polyphonic means the simultaneous combination of two or more melodic notes. The simultaneous combination of two or more melodic notes. So the archaeologists were very quickly able to deduce it wasn't a Sydney Divine record. But you know, does that ring a bell? How many of you watch Have I Got News for You on a Friday night? You know that thing with Paul Merton, etc. And on the show, at the second last round, they always have a rather obscure magazine from which to fill in the blanks. Well, my wife and I were sitting watching it a few weeks ago, and lo and behold, the magazine was this, Subterranean Britannica. Now, I know you'll all have copies on your bedside table, but actually, I wrote an article on Scotland Beneath the Surface for this a few months ago. Imagine my surprise, therefore, when this popped up on the screen. Look at that. John Crawford from Glasgow was enjoying his backyard when he fell down the 12th century foul water sewer. There you are, ladies and gentlemen. I've been on Have I Got News for You. I'm famous. I should say, actually, they say Glasgow, it's Paisley. But of course, you must remember that the majority of the audience watching Have I Got News for You on a Friday night are English. And the English have always been totally unable to discern the difference between Scotland's largest city, Glasgow, and Scotland's largest royal borough, Paisley. So they had to translate it to Glasgow. There you are. By the way, I should say that Paul Merton's fellow guest panelist said, "Holy shit, holy shit." But, you know, when they were digging this, they tell you nowadays, when you go on these tours, that the monks dug that by hand in the 12th century. No, they did not. There's serfs who did it for them. But imagine, this is the 21st century. This is my girlfriend. This is Tunneling Tanya. Tunneling Tanya is quite a big lass. She weighs in at 23 tonnes. And she shifted 25,000 tonnes of rock and rubble from beneath Glasgow when they were building the Shield Hill sewage treatment works a few years ago. Absolutely fantastic. Now, if you want Girdle Ness sewage pipe in Aberdeen, 1901, exactly the same story as Scottish Water. They found that in their archives. Now, how many people have been on the overnight ferry from Aberdeen to Lerwick in Shetland? You're looking quite well. I have to say, I've never been so pleased to see dry land. But last year, when we were going to Aberdeen Harbour, we saw this, just from the ferry. This is just before I got ill. My goodness, it's a monument. It's called Scarty's Monument, brick-built obelisk. And what on earth is that? Well, actually, if you look at the top, it's open at the top. It's actually the vent pipe for the Girdle Ness sewage treatment works in Aberdeen from Victorian times. Now, I worked quite a number of years for SSE along at Inverarmond there. Wonderful people, thoroughly enjoyed it. The first day I was at Inverarmond, they sent me up to Perthshire. And they said, you must go and see the dam at Perthshire. I've been going there to see the fish ladder since it was about that high. Anyway, I'll find it. And when I went to Perthshire, they said, the most important thing to remember, Bruce, is that the water that generates hydroelectric power at Perthshire has already generated hydroelectricity 5 times before it gets there. And that's because of pumped storage. You know, this natural, the pump recycling of the water. Everybody remembers Sir Tom Johnson, the Secretary of State for Scotland after the Second World War, first chairman of the North of Scotland Hydroelectric Board. How many people remember the men who dug the tunnels that made right through the Highlands, which made that possible, that whole system possible? Well, this is them. They're called the Tunnel Tigers, and this is up at St Fillan's in the Breadalbin hydro scheme. The year's 1955, and in that week, they'd actually drilled through 578 feet of solid rock. It was a world tunnelling record. There you go. And they're looking happy. They all got their photographs taken. There you go. But in addition to that, they also got a 10% bonus on their weekly wage. Would anybody like to hazard a guess what a 10% bonus on your weekly wage was in 1955? Well, I'd have said that. That's exactly what I'd have said. Actually, it was £20. These guys were earning £200 a week in 1955, and they earned every last penny of it, I can tell you. This is what they were doing. This is actually about Ben Cruachan. Basically, it's water at height, right at the top of the mountain, pummels down through the hollow mountain during the day, generates hydroelectric power. At night, they use a minuscule amount of that to pump it back up. Recycling renewable resources. We were doing it in the 40s, 50s, and 60s here in Scotland. And inside, have you all been to the Ben Cruachan site? Absolutely fantastic inside. This is the machinery hall. 780,000 cubic feet of solid rock extracted from that. And you see up there, there's one of these bulldozers, huge Euclid bulldozers, and some of that the Caterpillar bulldozers and the Euclid dumper truck. You know how big that plant and machinery is in real life, don't you? They look like dinky cars when you see them inside that. Absolutely phenomenal. Now, I have to say the good news, I know they had a wee fire last week, but the good news is that Rax is developing another hollow mountain next door. In a few years' time, you'll have literally the next generation of hydroelectric power in the Highlands. Absolutely fantastic. My wife and I were in Doubtful Sound in South Island, New Zealand a few years ago. We went to their hollow mountain, and just like Ben Cruachan, you can get a guided tour. At the end of the tour, they said, Bruce, were you impressed? Oh, I said I was mightily impressed. But I said, you must always remember that the first hollow mountain to generate hydroelectric power was Ben Cruachan at Loch Awe in Scotland, 1965. Fantastic. Now, of course, when I was at SSE, we were drilling other tunnels. This is Glendoe scheme. This is up between Fort Augustus and Foyers on Loch Ness. This tunnel is 16 feet wide. It's 5 miles long. It goes right from the top of the mountain, right down through the mountain to generate hydropower in a turbine down beside Loch Ness. Absolutely amazing. In addition to that, there are 55 miles of tunnel across Stratherick, across that whole catchment, harnessing that water resource. Now, you'll remember from school, of course, that the Great Glen is a fault line. It goes back and forth and back and forth. Well, there are smaller faults as well. You see the white lines there? That's the Conglean fault. And one day I was sitting along at Inverarmond and I got a call from the site manager. Oh, he says, bad hair day at the office, Bruce. 466 feet of the tunnel had collapsed. Well, do you know, that's a huge investment. When I talk about engineering, I always say you learn far more from your mistakes in engineering than you ever learn from your success stories. It had to be put right within a few short months, built a bypass tunnel, an access tunnel. It's now jewel in the crown of Scottish hydroelectric power generation in the Great Glen. And in addition, SSE is building another hollow mountain down at Lochie, which will more than double the UK's capacity to store renewable energy. Fantastic hope for the future. Now I'm going to talk about offshore wind farms. This is the point where you say, Bruce, you've lost the plot. My goodness, they're above ground. Did you not know that? No. Well, this is up at Nig, and any offshore wind farm, like any structure, needs a foundation. This sits on 184 feet of water. Beneath each pod, cylindrical piles go down 100 to about 130 feet into the solid bedrock of the North Sea. In the Beatrice field, there's 84 of them. They're the largest offshore foundations of any deepest foundations of any wind farm anywhere in the world. And they get bigger all the time because at the Moray East, there's 100 turbines. And when you generate electricity, you have to bring it ashore. It comes down that umbilical cords there. You have to build subsea cables. In the case of the Moray East here, there's 311 miles of subsea cable bringing it ashore. You got to Banff, just to the west of Banff, there's a little village called Inverboindy. And that's where they pop, pop, pop up out of the ground again. And off they go to Blackhillock and onto the national grid. Absolutely tremendous. But you know, there's very, very few men on that boat. It's all mostly done by computers now. Compare that. This is the William Hutt. This is the boat that laid the original telegraph table under the sea between Ireland and Port Patrick. Look at how labour-intensive that was, and dangerous. 3 men died in that. But you know, talking about danger, you don't talk about coal industry. Oh my goodness, we're still producing 25% of British coal until about 2004. Dangerous industry though. You know, at Blantyre, 277 men killed in a single fire damp explosion. No welfare state in these days. Within a few months, 60 of the widows have been evicted from their tied cottages. Dreadful. But just as it was very dangerous and lots of fatalities, it also produced some fantastic civil engineering. 1964. Now, remember last year they celebrated the 60th anniversary of the opening of the Forth Road Bridge in 1964? How many people remember there was a tunnel dug in the same year, right between Longannet and Fife, right to Kinneil, just beside Bo'ness, 3.1 miles long. And my goodness, there were no computers in these days either. They had to work it out by logarithms and back of an envelope stuff. Alistair Moore here he is, the chief engineer for the job. This is him shaking hands with his counterpart coming from the Longannet end. This is 1.6 miles under the River Forth. Do you know, when he shook hands, they were 2 inches out. More or less, near as damn it, spot on. Fantastic civil engineering. Of course, the headline in the Scotsman, the Courier, the Herald the next day, all said, tunnel under the Forth secures miners' jobs. I don't need to tell any of you that Kinneil closed, Longannet closed in 1978 and Kinneil in 1982. End of an era. Now, there must be a few railway buffs here. Everywhere you go, I meet the railway children. If you go through to Glasgow, if you go to London, you're on the oldest underground metro system in the world. Go to Budapest, the 2nd oldest. Here, you only need to go to Glasgow for the 3rd oldest underground metro system in the world, 1896, round and round and round and round on the Glasgow Underground, as Francie and Josie used to tell us about. Remember? My goodness, the Clockwork Orange, only electrified in 1933. But in that same year, there was a north and a south rotunda on either side of the Clyde. This is the North Rotunda. It's actually at Finniston. You know where the Squinty Bridge is now? Just right. Well, it's still there to this day. And horses and carts used to be taken down on Otis Elevator of New York, sophisticated lifting gantry, all the way down from street level to the level of the tunnel. I say tunnel, but actually there wasn't one, but 3 tunnels, each 16 feet in diameter. Horses and carts went in one tunnel, in one direction, one tunnel, and the other direction in another tunnel, and pedestrians went in the middle. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the first dual carriageway in Scotland, and it was under the Clyde in 1896. Scotland Street in Edinburgh, Thomas Granger, £100,000 to build this great railway tunnel, and then they changed the line. What on earth do you do with a disused railway tunnel? What's it like inside a disused railway? If you go up to Glenfarg, you'll find out what it's like inside a disused railway tunnel. My goodness. It became Scotland's largest mushroom farm. Now, my granny came from Dundee. She told me all sorts of stories about Dundee, and some of them might even have been true. But she never told me there was a railway tunnel under the law. You know the volcanic plug in the middle of Dundee? Well, there was. This is it. Dundee to Newtile Railway, the first commercial rail line in the north of Scotland. But you know, if I'd said, Granny, why did you never tell me there was a railway tunnel under the law? In true Dundonian style, she would merely have responded, well, Bruce, you never asked. You never asked. Oil shale, you know, geology, geochemistry, inventive genius of James Paraffin Young, produced 26 million barrels of oil before the First World War from beneath West Lothian. But it's all gone now. Or has it? British Geological Survey have looked under West Lothian and they reckon there's 300 million tonnes of commercially viable oil shale. They tell me that 10% of that would meet Scotland's oil needs for 30 years and employ 10,000 people. That's quite a claim, is it not? My goodness. Well, of course, it's not going to happen anytime soon, because oil shale, just like coal, old king coal, not such a merry old soul now. It's a fossil fuel, bête noire of people who believe that you can't capture the carbon. We can have a chat about that another day. Ain't going to happen anytime soon. And you'd have to frack it to get it out, of course. And they tell me it's dangerous to frack in Scotland. So ain't going to happen anytime soon. And then, of course, they built Livingston on top of it. But there again, ladies and gentlemen, it's only Livingston, you know. So never say never. It's the largest oil shale resource anywhere in the world outside Russia. So perhaps now it's got a strategic defence prerogative like never before. Never say never. I say defence. Ever since they were building tunnels under St Andrew's Castle, we've looked underground to defend the nation. This is up at Invergordon. It's not one but 5 tanks completely underground at Inchindown. Each of these tanks, 444 feet long, 30 feet wide, 44 feet high. Each of these tanks would hold 16 double-decker buses. But it's no bus depot for Invergordon. Actually, it was for furnace fuel oil, the stuff that the Navy used to power their boats. And each of these tunnels would hold 16,000 gallons of furnace fuel oil. Of course, it's all empty now. And indeed, I understand they were full during the Falklands War. But there are not just 5 here at Inchindown. There's actually another 5 up at Hoy on Scapa Flow. And there's supposed to be a few between Grangeworth and Queensferry as well. And yet, what a huge civil engineering operation to go through during the Second World War to put these underground. Was that worthwhile? Well, they tell me in a single night in May 1941, when there was one surface furnace fuel store in Invergordon, the Luftwaffe blew it up. So perhaps it was worthwhile going underground. Now, anybody been in the Royal Observer Corps during the Cold War? Night after night, 20, 30, 40 feet underground. This is Skelmally, which is down on just south of Weems Bay on the Clyde. And Mr. Alexander was an ROC officer during the Cold War. He made his retirement project to restore, refurbish the store, the ROC post. You can phone him up, you can go and have a look at it. Look how cramped that was, especially compared to this. Have you all been to the secret bunker in East Fife? You know, the guided tour there. Not 1, 2, but 3 stories completely underground. Of course, you can go there and learn all about the Cold War. You can get married there, have a bar mitzvah there, anything you like. So it's a tourist attraction now. Sure, you've all been. But I've always been quite cynical about the secret bunker, and I'll tell you why. You know, in the 1930s, the Germans had all this aerial photographs of the whole of Scotland. They knew all about Clydebank and Leith and Rosyth and Dundee and Aberdeen and Scapa Flow, etc. They also got the 1-inch to the mile imperial maps of the whole country. And not only did they translate them from English into German, they also transposed them from the imperial 1-inch to the mile map to 1 to 50,000 scale. The first metricated maps of Scotland, Carte von Scotland, produced by the Germans in the 1930s. Now, you're not telling me, ladies and gentlemen, that the Germans had that amount of intelligence during the 1930s, that in the 50s and 60s, the Russians didn't have a pretty good idea that we were building a tunnel and we were building a bunker under the ground in the East Duke of Fife. Pull the other one, pull the other one. And then if you were the farmer next door and you saw all this activity going on, would you not say to yourself, my God, what a muckle crop of tatties going in there? And I have to say, I've always had I always have a wry smile when I come across the beautiful, iconic Queensferry crossing heading north on the M90. I think, thank God the Russians didn't choose to invade by the M90. We even tell them where the bloody place is. It's been a eclectic mix of different things. I'm sorry, just a wee bit of everything. But I hope it's... People say, oh, it's all about beneath the surface. It's all about fossils and that sort of thing. Well, actually, it's really about our natural resources and the way that we manage them. And I think of the future. I look at Drax producing that second hollow mountain at Bencruchen. I look at Loch Lochy and SSE developing a hollow mountain. I look, you know, in Glasgow, the 13 boreholes going way, way down, tapping ground source as an energy source for the future. And if you go down to Leavenmouth and Fife, they're actually using the old gas pipes as a distribution system for hydrogen. Just an experiment at the moment, but who knows, it might be something. Every time you switch on the news, there's another war that Donald Trump hasn't secured, you know? My goodness, it's such a dark, depressing time when you switch the news on now. But I look at the natural resources that we've got in this country, and I think, you know, if we were to manage them, people say sustainably. I don't like the word sustainably, often misused, misquoted. I prefer another S word, sensible. If we're only sensible about the way that we manage our natural resources, perhaps, ladies and gentlemen, with the terrific resources that we've got in this country, there is maybe light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you very much indeed.
I suspect that you haven't run out of words yet, have you, Bruce? Let's find out. Any of you got any questions for Bruce?
I was interested in saying that the slate industry, the slate quarries are going to be starting up again in Scotland. Yeah. So the question is it still going to be economically viable at that sort of price? Because if you're bringing in slates from Brazil, where labour costs are considerably cheaper, so that's my question. Yeah,
well, I think it'll be sustainable in the sense that actually you'll cut up all the slate miles, I suppose, that you might, if you take that into account. And the second fact that actually these guys are unemployed. You know, they need something to do. And to give them something constructive to do that they can then do for the future of the country seems a good idea to me. It might, you know, might not strictly be economic in pure pound signs, but I think, you know, taking everything into account, a comprehensive look at everything, it's a good idea. And besides that, morally, I think it's and socioeconomically, it sounds a jolly good thing to do. Yeah.
Any questions? Don't make me redundant. One at the back.
Is there any potential, do you think, to that hasn't yet been exploited or seen by your sort of lateral view of things?
Yeah, I think so. Could you repeat the question for a second? I'm quite deaf.
Sorry.
Actually. Yeah.
Is there any potential resource, do you think, that could be exploited that nobody else has yet seen?
Other resources. I'm sure there's lots and lots and lots of things that we haven't even thought of yet. And as science and technology develops, the ability to get things out of the ground in a more, to use the word, sustainable fashion than we've ever done before, certainly scope exists. And look at the engineering skills that we've got in Scotland, way, way back over the centuries. If we had STEM, you know, part of the education system to the fore, we should be developing our own thinking and all of that about how we do it in a more sustainable way. Yeah.
When we've got so many mountains and so many lochs in Scotland, why don't we have more schemes to pump the water up to the top of the mountains and generate electric?
They would if I was in charge. Yeah. Billy might think, so, God, he's opinionated, isn't he? Well, my granny came from Dundee. Are you surprised? Aye.
Bearing in mind that there isn't really, or wasn't a problem with space, why do you think they actually started to go underground in the 12th century, for instance, with the monks and the monasteries and stuff like that? What was the reason for them going underground?
Well, I think they were way ahead of it. I think they're a wee bit like the Romans. Think of what the Romans did, not so much in Scotland, but certainly in Bath and all these places. They had these, you know, very sophisticated engineering and water and hygiene standards, etc. I think they were just ahead of the time. And I think after that, we entered a sort of dark ages, as it were, historically, and we went backwards rather than coming forward. Yeah.
Any more? We've got a little burst of questions there. Any more brewing up? The rest of you, keep thinking.
I don't have so much a question as an observation. I always feel obliged to fly the flag for Dalbeattie granite, which is not nearly as well known as Aberdeen, but was equally important.
My mother, as a small girl at school in Perth, was asked where in Scotland is famous for granite. And as her parents were both from the Stewartry, she said Dalbeattie.
Yep.
And she was told by the teacher she was wrong. It was Aberdeen. So she went home, and her father said to her, well, go back tomorrow and tell your teacher that Liverpool docks are built of Dalbeattie granite. So
Absolutely.
and Dalbeattie Granite Quarry is still in existence. It's still in operation.
You're absolutely right. And of course, and Dalbeattie gets a mention in the book, I have to tell you. Absolutely. Very, very important. And I thought, actually, when I said slate, you're all going to tell me, well, what about Carmiley in Angus and all the slate that's produced there? And all the billiard tables and snooker tables there are around the world that have got a bit of Carmiley slate in the bottom of them. So, you know, I told them that in Montefieth anyway.
You showed us a photograph of an incredible drill that goes away. You showed us a photograph of an incredible drill that goes all the way through a mountain.
Yep.
But it was difficult to get a sense of scale from the photo. Do you remember any of the kind of the size of it, the measurements of what we saw?
Tunneling Tanya thing.
The thing that was going all the way...
It goes down. Yeah, well, it goes down 1,600 feet into the mountain. I honestly couldn't tell you the dimensions off bat.
Just wondered.
But it's pretty big. It's pretty big. Yeah. And I'm sure they have to replace the drill bit every now and again as well. Yeah.
Shall we have a quick vote for your favourite granite? Aberdeen? Dalbeattie? No.
Yeah.
Any more questions finally for Bruce? Okay, I'll hand back to Richard.
Well, a tour de force, a subterranean odyssey indeed.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. It was a vast amount of fascinating information there, from speleology to Skara Brae, from undercrofts to granite quarries, from waterways to underground railways, and much, much more. All in a very engaging, entertaining style. I've learned a great deal, massive amount of information there to take in. Not least as a bit of a golfer, the origin of the word caddy, which is certainly new to me, and the origin of the word polyphony, which is also new. So, is your book out?
Yes, the book.
Right, well, there you are, everybody. Go to Waterstones.
I'll say something about it.
It should be like that. So, anyway, thanks very much for a superb presentation. Everybody has been fascinated by it, and we'll thank Bruce in the usual way. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can I say just two things? Thanks very much indeed. You've been such a lovely audience, and one of the great things about being retired is I don't need to sit in Inverarm working all day. It's just great to be here. I have to tell you, I've got a few copies of the book with me. If anybody wants a copy, I'm delighted to sign copies afterwards. It's reduced to £20, and cash is great. But just if you want a copy. Can I just say one last thing in closing? When I was at school, I wanted to do higher history and higher geography. And they told me, I was at Stirling High School, they told me it was against the school rules to do higher history and higher geography. I wanted at least 2 hires, you know? So we got a new teacher, and Mr. Welsh, and he came in and he said, I said, Mr. Welsh, do you think I can do higher history and higher geography, please? Well, he says, I don't think so, Bruce, because it's against the school rules. And you know, 2 days later he came back to me. He says, you know, I think if we tweak the curriculum a bit, you could do higher history and higher geography. Now, clearly, I had to give up needlework, you know. and as you can probably tell, it thwarted my career ever since. But you know, I was always grateful to Mr. Welsh. He was one of these wonderful teachers who's lost to the teaching profession because he left teaching and he went to become a politician. And you'll know who I'm talking about. His name was Andrew Welsh. And he was the MP and MSP for Angus. And just as I was publishing the book 2.5 years ago, I read in the Courier that very sadly, Andrew Welsh had passed away. So I wrote to his widow. I knew she lived in Arbroath, wrote to the constituency office. I said, you'll get lots and lots of letters telling you what a wonderful politician Andrew was, what a great MP, what a great MSP, what a great constituency MP. But I said, I'd just like to let you know that he was a great teacher. And I told her the story about the higher history and the higher geography. And she wrote back to me, she says, kind of you to write, Bruce, but she said, actually, she said, I got lots and lots of letters for Andrew, plaudits for him as a politician. But you were the only person in Stirling High School who wrote and told me he was a wonderful teacher. Now, the truth be told this morning, ladies and gentlemen, actually, I was the only person at Stirling High School who could write. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you.
It's on the 27th of October when we will be hearing about Branklin Garden. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Oh, thanks. Good fun. Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. Yeah.